Nguyen and I'm your host on Inside Vietnam. Hello everyone and welcome back to the show. My name is Phi Nguyen and I'm your host on Inside Vietnam. Today we're taking you out of the studio and into the executive boardroom of the New World Hotel Saigon for a special episode on strategic entry into the youth segment of Vietnam. Asian youth aged under 20 makes up roughly about 35% of the total Asian population and 15% of the world's population. Needless to say, this is a significant market segment for manufacturers and marketers. While Vietnam ranks 6th in Asia's youth population, what does it mean in terms of strategic entry into this potential segment? Should companies adopt a global or regional marketing and communication strategy, or should companies design a separate strategy for Vietnam? Let's have an in-depth discussion today with our panel of 3 guest speakers. Mr. Martin Gu, General Manager Indochina of Coca-Cola, Mr. Raf Mathes, Regional Managing Director of TNS, and Ms. Phương Linh Nguyen, Research Manager of TNS True. Okay, good afternoon everyone, and thank you very much for joining us on Inside Vietnam today. We've got Linh from TNS True, we've got Martin from Coca-Cola, and we've got Raf from TNS Region. The topic for today is quite a very exciting topic because it's about the youth segment, which is one of the biggest segments in Vietnam and in Asia at the moment. So before we discuss any further into the trends and the strategies, let's talk about the size of the segment in Asia in general.
I think first and foremost, the world's population is 6.5 million, with 60% residing in Asia. So that's 3.94 billion people in Asia. And of that, 1.4 billion are actually under 20. Now, if you break that up, that's actually bigger than all young people in Europe and North America by double. So just to show you what the potential power of the youth market is in this region is really quite huge.
Does that mean Asia is a very, very important market for Coca-Cola?
Absolutely. It is perceived to be the growth market for the company in the future. It is a very strategic move for us, and it is important not only in the context of youth, which is absolutely critical, but in the context of overall growth and development of what we consider to be the primary engine of growth, which is the emergence of a big middle class. So it's not only young, but it's actually emerging in that sense from a macroeconomic sense. So that is another angle of which it is important for us.
Coming back to the youth segment, how is Asia in terms of its ranking in total global youth segment, and how is that translated into Asia as an important region of the world?
The total youth population of Asia makes up 15% of the global population.
15%, that's 1/5.
So absolutely huge. Asian region is quite different. If you take a look at places like Japan, Japan has a negative growth rate. There's more pet dogs than there are babies in Japan, for example. Even places like Taiwan, Korea are all declining in population, as well as China. China's got a growth rate of 0.57, obviously because of the one-child policy and whatnot, and that's something quite necessary for a country like that. Vietnam has a very reasonable growth rate of 1.1, so that's about 1 million babies a year. At present, 31 million of 89 million people in Vietnam are under the age of 20, which is 35%, but that's actually considerably lower than some of the other countries. Philippines, China, Indonesia, India all have substantially bigger youth populations than Vietnam. So Vietnam actually rates number 5 in Asia, but I mean Asia is number 1 again by double. I think another very young culture is Africa, as well as South America, where Martin knows very well. But they have yet to reach that sort of mid-level income that Martin was talking about. So the Asian region is much more attractive because you have youth and you have the income. So that's why the economic growth engine for a lot of companies is this part of the world.
In terms of level of importance, though, of Asia because of the youth population, how is it ranked in comparison to other regions or regional markets globally for Coca-Cola?
The Pacific region, which excludes India, for the way that we are organized and we're set up, is around 20% of our global volume, but it is contributing quite a large proportion of the growth. As Ralph was mentioning, Japan is a bit of an outlier in the way that we look at Asia, because Japan is a very mature market, not only from a business standpoint but from a population and demographic standpoint. Excluding Japan, the growth in Asia is quite explosive for the beverage industry in general. So it is probably number one or number two in importance for a company globally in terms of potential growth for the future.
Okay. But in Asia, you've mentioned 5 different countries, with Vietnam being 5th. How do you see Vietnam? Do you still see Vietnam as a key market in Asia then?
Absolutely. I think if you go back about a year ago, the head of HSBC came up with a new acronym, like we need another new acronym in our lives, but he came up with something called CIVETS. And this, we've all heard of BRIC, we've heard of N11, and now we have CIVETS. CIVETS standing for Colombia, Indonesia, Vietnam, South Africa, Egypt, and Turkey. So these are the 6 emerging major markets in the world, and Indonesia and Vietnam are 2 of them. So obviously, Vietnam is definitely being looked at by any company that has not looked at Vietnam so far. You know.
Yeah, and not only because of the size of the population but because of the speed of development, the liberalization of the economy, the entrance onto the WTO, all those things have accelerated. And you look at Vietnam on another scale. For example, from a foreign direct investment standpoint, it is probably the number 2 destination right now outside China, and it's at par with Indonesia, which is a much larger country in terms of population. So it is a very attractive market in many ways.
Yeah.
So how do you structure your market clusters at the moment, and where is Vietnam in that cluster?
Well, we have numerous ways of segmenting, but I would say right now the way we're looking at the world, there is a world of established middle class. And there is a world of emerging middle class, and Vietnam is high on the list of that emerging middle class cluster, where we are looking at mega trends like urbanization and growth of the middle class, and acceleration of technology usage. And when you combine those 3 factors with the percentage of youth present in a market like Vietnam, out of the emerging middle class cluster of markets, Vietnam is a quite important one.
So your emerging middle class cluster would be across different regions, not necessarily just in Asia.
Exactly.
Right? I understand that you recently launched a global true study, and you study the youth segment globally. Now, how do you actually cluster the youth sector globally? Do you actually break down the sector into geographical areas like what we discussed about, or is it also immersed in emerging markets?
True was done in 46 countries across the globe, and we do like from 12 to 19, and also like a young segment of 20 to 24.
clusters come from trends. They come from what evolves out of the research, okay? So, I mean, obviously, North America is very unique. It's similar to Western Europe, but still very different than Western Europe. Eastern Europe is very different. Africa is very different. Asia, a country of, you know, again, 4 billion people, and I don't know how many countries, 30 some odd countries or whatever, there are certain clusters. Japan and Korea are very similar. You've got the Korean wave. You've got, you know, it's about enjoying life. It's not about committing to work. It's about carpe diem, live for the day much more. You know, there's this entire youth culture in Japan and South Korea, which is very interesting and very, very different than anywhere else in the world. Even, I believe, one of the Korean pop songs has hit the American top of the charts, finally. Yeah, so the Korean wave is invading America, actually. Then you have countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, and China. And they're more similar because family is still sort of the cornerstone of those, and they're countries that are developing, mind you, at different rates, but they're developing, so everything is sort of new. And in a way, these are the first generation Xers for them. There was no generation X before because everybody was poor and there were no choices. Today there's choices. You know, so if you look at you have to look at the clusters that way by the development of the country and how that has spawned youth culture.
There is something called global teens as a segment that some people talk about. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't really think that global teenage culture exists yet. I think that there is. I think that there are medium that the teenagers are using more commonly to communicate with, whether it's, you know, all the social networks or the incredible penetration of mobile phones into daily lives across, you know, from waking up to going to bed, and for multiple uses. But despite that commonality, the way they live their lives is still radically different. What they value in their lives is still radically different. Ralph mentioned some of that. We consider, for example, in the case of Vietnam, that this is really the first teenage generation in the traditional Western view of what teenage life is about. Finding your own boundaries, setting your own identity, exploring. All those things were not really part of culture, of youth culture in Vietnam up until the last maybe 4 or 5 years. So one of the challenges for teenagers in Vietnam today is that their elder brothers, did not live through this. Their youth was very different, so there's no frame of reference. It wasn't like, you know, I was growing up, my friends' brothers.
My brothers went to concerts, why can't I go to concerts?
Or they started smoking at a certain age, I'm going to start smoking at that age. There's no pattern. So it's, I personally don't believe on a global youth culture.
I mean, even with countries close to Vietnam, like Thailand and Indonesia, there's still like certain difference, and we are quite close to each other. So definitely, not yet that kind of Western global teen perception. So.